Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us this beautiful Memorial Day weekend Sunday morning. It's been a while since we've recorded, so I'm kind of rusty at it. I assuming Pastor Carl will be kind of rusty at it. Nah, he won't be rusty. Well, we have a lot going on in the next little while, so I actually have something to talk about. It's Memorial Day, 3-day weekend. That's exciting. Our women's group meets on Thursday at 11 o'clock here at the Father's house and on Zoom at 6:30 on Thursday nights. Our evening group is just getting ready to wrap up our study that we've been doing, so we're looking for something else to do. Next Saturday at 8 o'clock here at the Father's house, the men are having a breakfast. So if you'd be interested, I know they'd love to have you join and feed you. Next week is also Communion Sunday, so we'll be having a meal following service. Love to have you be a part of that. Then the following Saturday, which is June 7th, we do our second Saturday, and oh no, that's the 14th. Sorry. June 14th, we'll do our second Saturday where we come to the church, do a couple of hours of cleanup. Love to have you join us and help out with that. Then Father's Day is that Sunday, which is the 15th. And then from June 23rd to the 27th, we're going to do Vacation Bible School. So if you'd like your kids to be a part of that, or if you want to come and help, love to have you be a part of that too. Today is our regular tithes and offerings, so you know the drill. You can go to thefathershouse.org, click on the giving button. You can mail a check to 133 Bernal Road, San Jose, California, 95119. Or you can come and join us at church. We'd love to see your faces. I know some of you live out of the area, so that's not possible to do, but know that you are still part of the Father's house and we love and care for you. So, again, like I mentioned, love to have you come and join us and come back to church and be part of the community. And that's all I have to cover today. So we'll turn the time over to Pastor Carl.
Well, good morning, Father's House. And he was right. It's been a long, long time since we've been on here, that's for sure. I guess I got lazy. So blame it on me. Penny would have been here. Actually, I just kind of needed a break. I had a lot going on with a lot of other stuff that I was doing, just education wise, some traveling we were doing, getting things through Easter and through Mother's Day. And so it was just, and we were tired. And so we just decided, let's just take a break for a while and then we'll come back. So we're back, and we're here for a while until I get tired again. And I guess the older I get, the easier that happens. So that is what it is. That's about it as far as that goes. The weather's been good as we rush into summer. Bet you got your gardens going, that kind of stuff going off. So looking forward to a great summer, as I think that you probably are as well. There's a lot to talk about in kind of where we're headed and where we're going as a congregation. As I said, the first this year that we were going to go back to, I was going to do some biblical narratives, talking about some Old Testament characters, probably some New Testament characters as well. But right now, I'm going to switch something. We've been doing Samuel, if you recall, for a long time. And for about the last 6 weeks, we've had a lot of other speakers. We've had Mario, we've had Carlos several times. And so I knew then that I really couldn't get into a new series because it was going to be very fragmented. But we're kind of getting into it now. So I want to do a new series. Samuel proved to be so fruitful. I got a lot of feedback about how much people enjoyed that figure, Samuel, the prophet and the judge, the last judge of Israel. And now I want to go back to before the time of the judges. So we're going to go backwards and we're going to look at the life of Joshua, which Joshua was the successor of Moses. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Joshua because his story in every way is as amazing as what Samuel's is, and on par. As much as Samuel was a spiritual figure, Joshua being a spiritual figure and spiritually minded, but more than that, he was a conqueror, he was a warrior, he was a soldier. And so, he was like, Moses was going to bring them into the promised land. Moses didn't make it to the promised land. Joshua was the one that was going to make it into the promised land and give the promised land by driving out the inhabitants so that they could all inherit their portion. We'll get to that a little bit later, but we're going to look at this Joshua figure and understand that he's got a completely different role for Israel than what Samuel had. Where I said Samuel was more of a spiritual leader, we're going to see that Joshua is the successor of Moses. And I've kind of come to the opinion in reading and studying for this of two things. Number one, I don't think the Israelites liked Moses that much. I actually don't. I think that they understood that he was their leader, but I think they had some disdain for Moses because Moses, man, he kind of held them to the task. And I think that in the early part of Joshua's uh, time ministry and in his preparation and going into the Canaan, I don't think the people liked him very much either. And I think the reason is because what we're going to see is that Joshua was mentored by Moses. He was a servant of Moses, or Moses trained Joshua. And we'll pick that up a little bit later as to why I think that there was some suspicion about Joshua. And man, quite frankly, I think they didn't like him at the beginning. Maybe they did later like him more, but I think they liked him about as much as Moses. But we'll get into that a little bit later. And I could be all wrong about that, but I don't think I am. I read. So with that, then, I want to talk about a little bit about Joshua today, and it's going to get a little bit slow to start with because I've got to introduce kind of Joshua and who he is. And then the second thing is today we're going to talk a little bit about the first mention of Joshua that we have in the Bible, which shows up in Exodus chapter 17. And so in this text that I'm going to read, there's a couple of things that become important in this text. First thing is, why is it that Moses selected Joshua for the task that he was going to give him? And the task was going to be to go out in battle against the Amalekites. Why, out of all the men of Israel he could have picked, why did he pick Joshua? That's the interesting thing here, a question there. The second thing is that I want you to keep in mind is the idea of that going into battle against the Amalekites. Who are the Amalekites? And I want to tell you that the Amalekites have really stayed with Israel. In some cases, some would argue, even to this present day, that there's always been an animosity between the Amalekites, which are ultimately called Edomites. I'll get to that, Amalekites. But there's always been an animosity between the Amalekites or the Edomites, which they're a tribe kind of in some sense of the Edomites, and the people of Israel. There's always been this tension. And so what we're seeing this tension, which really started back with Esau and Jacob, that started back there. We're starting to see this tension now come to fruition as the people of God, with Moses moving them out of the land. Moses is now taking them out of captivity. They're coming across the Red Sea. And as they come across the Red Sea, they're tired, they're hungry, they're thirsty, and it takes a while for God to give them their provisions by way of manna and by way of water. It's not that they're starving, and it's not that they don't have water, but they're already beginning to complain. Well, so the group kind of gets they kind of get stretched out a little bit as they're sojourning and moving across the land because some are younger, weaker, some are weaker, whatever the case might be. Some are thirsty, some are hungry. And the Amalekites attack them from the rear and start killing off their young. And so while they're killing off their young and the stragglers that are back there, eventually gets to the point where Moses recognizes this and he's going to send Joshua into a battle. So what we have here is we have the enemies of God, which are the Amalekites, and we have the people of God. The enemies of God, when we're talking about the Amalekites, is interesting. And this is kind of the way that the Jews in that they saw them and how they relate to them even in present day form. The Amalekites were known for their anti-Semitism, for their anti-Judaism, for their anti-Jewish nation. So they were always anti-Jewish. And so there's this part with anti-Semitism, which is the same thing. There's a part of that where for the Jewish or the nation of Israel, whenever they encounter anti Semitism in any shape and form, it's always the spirit of Amalek, if not the very lineage of Amalek. And so for them, some key figures of who would have been the spirit of the Edomites or Amalek, because remember the Edomites or the Amalek's a tribe of the Edomites. The spirit, especially of Amalek, would could be personified as an archetype in people groups. For instance, Amalek could be representative of Rome at the time of Jesus, when Rome had occupied Israel and they had made Israel their slaves. They had conquered the land and they were under the purview or the government of, or the governance of Rome. And so, because of that, and as we know, I mean, they were brutal to the Jews. I mean, crucifying their men, all the different things that happened, the way that they treated the people. And so, there was this tension between the Jews of Jesus's day and the Roman Empire. To further forward that further, they would see, or the Jewish nation would see Nazism or Hitler and the Third Reich in Germany, what they did with the Holocaust, they would see them as anti Semites or anti Semitism, and they would see them as this archetype of this spirit of anti Semitism that seeks to destroy the Jews. You can kind of see that same anti Semitism or the spirit of Amalek in that type when we talk about Iran, that Iran, or is it, yeah, Iran wants to wipe them off the face of the earth and push them into the sea and kill all of the Jews. They've said that in current days publicly. They've said that. Now, whether that's speaking that by hyperbole or allegorically, we're not really sure. But the idea is that there's this tension between the people of God and the Amalekites. And I want to pick up that tension here for a minute, or in this, what we're talking about in this story that I'm going to tell, because I want to suggest that this tension exists in us in this present day as Christians in a spiritual form. It's the spirit of the Antichrist that seeks to destroy or that seeks to encapsulate or capture or to oppress the very people of God who we as Christians are. So in some cases, it's the spirit of the Antichrist, and it's the spirit of what I would also want to call the flesh or our fleshly bodies that always wages war with the Holy Spirit that is in us. So when we're talking through the book of Joshua or the life of Joshua, in this beginning part, I want to always bring this into the spiritual context of, as in the Christian context, it has everything to do with our battle of the prevailing spirit of the age or the age in which we live, that is the worldly age that is counterintuitive or in direct contrast to the kingdom of God and the way that we Christians should live. So there's the spirit of the world, and there's also our own desires and our own flesh. That in us we find in ourselves this spirit of rebellion in us that sometimes wants to go our own way. And so I want to make the distinction between the people of God and Joshua being the deliverer of the people, not the deliverer, I should say, but really the commander of the people and the one that God's presence is with, that he represents the spiritual us, and Amalek kind of basically is personified in the spirit of the world and in also our carnal flesh that seeks nothing of God, the things we want apart from God when we're selfish. So I'm kind of just giving this to you right now as a way of backdrop for what we're going to be talking about as we go forward. Amalek is anything that stands against God. Joshua is one that stands with God and for God on our behalf and with us. So it's this battle that sometimes happens within us between the things of the world that sometimes sway us and when we want God. How can I better explain it? It's like this thing that there was an Indian by the name of Two Dogs. And somebody asked him one time, well, why is it that your Indian name is and your name is Two Dogs? He says, well, that's simple. He says, that's because I have two dogs that live in me. So somebody asked him, well, which dog is stronger? And he said, well, I have two dogs. I have a black dog and I have a white dog. And somebody asked him, well, which dog is stronger? And he said, whichever dog I feed the most. And so there's a part where, when we're talking about our nature or when we're talking about the things of God, there's always a white dog and there's a black dog in our own lives. There could be, or maybe it could be unrighteousness and righteousness. It could be goodness and that which is not good. And in us, whatever we feed the most becomes characteristic in our life and the way that we live our lives. Well, sometimes we're prone to feed the black dog and not the white dog if we're calling the black dog bad and the white dog good, which we could actually invert those or reverse those. It wouldn't really matter. Call the white dog bad. Well, all I'm saying is we have this dualism that exists in our desires where we desire God sometimes, but sometimes we desire other things. So this is going to kind of come into play as we talk through Joshua. And I want to see if I can just drop that in the background. So we're going to go to the story now, for the sake of time, of the very first mention of Joshua in the book of Exodus, chapter 17. And again, the backdrop of today of what I want to ask, or I'm asking the question from now and for the next several weeks that we talk is, why did Moses and why did God select Joshua? That's the question. As much as this story is going to be about Aaron, it's going to be about her, it's going to be about Moses. Right now, what I want to do is I want to look through the lens, put on the lenses of asking the question, why is it that God and Moses sought out Joshua rather than any other men? And I want to just posit the idea that God saw something in Joshua that wasn't present in the other men, except for maybe one man that we'll talk about, Caleb, at this time in the life of Israel. I want to say that as they're coming out of Egypt, that there was something about Joshua that God saw, the same way that God saw something in Mary to present to her the opportunity to become the mother of Jesus. There was something there. So what is it that we find in Joshua? In his spirit, in his character, in his traits, in his personality. And so we're going to pick up in Exodus chapter 17, in verse 8, this first mention of Joshua. It says, then Amalek came and fought against Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose men for us and go out and fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses told him and fought against Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. So it came about that when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed, and when he let his hand down, or his hands down, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy. Then they took some stones and put it under him, and he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur supported his hands on one side and one on the other. Thus his hands were steady until the sun set. So Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this in a book as a memorial. Now get this, and recite it to Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. Moses built an altar and named it, the Lord is my banner. And he said, the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation. Three things. First of all, he said, write this in the book that we defeated the Amalekites. But I also want you to convey that to Joshua, because it's going to be important for Joshua to understand this, because in the future he's going to be my successor. The second thing there is, because of the victory that was there, they put up an altar and they worshiped God there. And they basically said that the Lord is my banner, or it's the title that's one of the titles that's given to God that is called Jehovah Nisi, or the Lord is my banner. What does that mean? That's going to be significant. And we're going to probably dialogue about that a little bit here in a minute. The third thing is, as much as he said that he was going to take or he's going to remove the name of the Amalekites forever, it also shows that it's not going to happen right now, but there's going to be a struggle from generation to generation. The same way that in our lives we struggle with our flesh, we struggle with the spirit of the world, and it never leaves us or it never leaves any Christian. That's why I'm saying there's a spiritual parallel between Amalek being a product of the flesh and a spirit that is an anti Christian spirit, and the people of God of who you and I are. So the first thing there is if you go back over the story, uh, the Amalekites attack Israel and they're picking off their young. Moses says this isn't going to happen anymore, and he selects Joshua. And he says, Joshua, this is what I want you to do. Tomorrow, I want you to go and select men from the camp. And tomorrow, I want you to lead them in a battle against the Amalekites because they're hassling us, and God is going to give us a land. They're our enemy. While you're doing that, I'm going to go up on the hill and I'm going to take my staff with me. Now, remember that Moses' staff was a symbol of the authority of God. So Moses goes up on the hill and he says he's going to take her and he's going to take Aaron. And they go up there and they start the battle. And whenever he holds up the staff, or whenever he holds up the staff in his hands like this, what happens is Joshua and the army advance and they prevail. But as Moses' hands begin to go down and he can't hold it up, the battle would reverse. So what they did was they gave Moses a rock to sit on. Now this was an all-day battle, all the way till the sunset. And who knows if it was the summertime and the sun didn't, started the battle at 6 in the morning and the sun didn't set till 9 o'clock. I don't know, but that's a long day. But it was so much for Moses and they wanted the victory that they set him on a rock and Aaron held up one hand and Hur held up the other hand. As long as they did that, it says that Joshua, by the end of the day, when the sun set, had defeated the Amalekites. Now remember, as much as this story could be about Moses or it could be about Aaron and Hur and what happened there, our question, our focus is on a different part of the text, which is Joshua. So there's this part in this first instance of Joshua where I want to suggest to you a couple of things. The first thing is that Joshua was giving an assignment by Moses. And this assignment was basically to be a leader and to be an initiator and to be a commander and to be a soldier or a warrior against the enemies of God. Now, perhaps Joshua could have turned it down at that time, but there was something in Joshua where Moses knew that that wasn't going to happen. So going into the battle and coming out of the battle, there's a second thing that's going to happen. The first thing is he was selected and he did the task. The second thing is we're now going to see that Joshua has been proven by Moses to be faithful to his word and his command. And therefore, as we go forward, we're going to see that Moses is going to take Joshua underneath his tutelage, and Joshua is going to become the successor of Moses. Aaron won't become, Miriam won't become that. Only Joshua is going to become that. So we're going to watch this mentorship that happens between Moses and Joshua that's almost initiated by God and by Joshua, not as much by Moses. And I'll explain that as we go further. So the first thing was he was faithful to Moses because he loved Moses. He was probably faithful to God because he loved God. The other people, as I said, didn't like Moses that much, but for some reason, Joshua was of a different spirit and loved Moses and became a servant the rest of Moses' life. The second thing that's interesting is that after they defeated the Amalekites, he told them to write it in the book. Now, that book that we're writing in is the very book that we're reading. It's this book. It's written and inscribed here about that battle. But notice what he said. The reason I want to do that is so that we have a history of what happened here today for God's people. But I want Joshua to remember this battle and the word that God spoke about having enmity with the Amalekites from generation to generation. So he never forgets that when he finally takes the people in the promised land. I want him to remember this day and the significance of this day. I also want him to remember a second thing, that our God is Jehovah Nissi. He is our banner. What does that mean when he says, and he says basically, and it was interesting because when I was looking through this, I was going through the different names of God, like Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Jireh, which is God is my provider, or the God will provide, or Jehovah Nissi, which is basically God is my banner. And there's some other ones that God is my healer. And there's all these different names of God that we find in the Old Testament, and there's 13 of them, major names of God. There's 13 of them, and I looked at it and I thought, that would be a good series to talk about in church about the different names of God that we find in the Old Testament. The reason that becomes important is because we begin to, by understanding the name of God, we begin to understand the character of God. Let me put it in this frame. My wife's name is Penny. I understand who Penny is by the things that she did. I fell in love with Penny because there's certain traits that I found in her that I love in her and I find beautiful and I find special. So I understand Penny by her character that her name represents. So in this context, when they go through this battle, basically what happens is God then gives a name, or Moses gives a name to God or an expression of God, where he basically builds an altar and says, Joseph, and he basically says, that Jehovah is our banner. Jehovah is our standard. Jehovah is the image that we bear to some extent. What does it mean by a banner or a standard? In ancient times, and you can almost see if you went back to the movie, what was it, The Patriot, when they're doing battle against the different sides, and you see one side on one side, and you see another army on the other side, and you see that they're holding up these banners with these coat of arms and different things that are on them, and you can see that there's a banner here, and there's another banner there, and there's a banner there, all in this line. It's going to be fighting against the other side, and the horses are there. And the rattling of the swords is there, and the shouting that people are here there, and you see people rallying under these banners. These banners were basically the symbols of what it is that they represented, either their tribe or the nation as a whole. So when they go into war, they would raise up these banners as a rallying point for the different troops. And so the troops would get excited, and there would be a patriotic pride that would come on them as they went and they as they went against their enemies. A good symbol of the American banner that would be put up would have been in World War II, and I don't remember the battle. I could get this wrong, but I think it was the Battle of Normandy. I don't know, maybe it was D-Day, where you see the statue and that picture of the Americans that have this flag, and they've conquered a land, and these Americans are beginning to raise the banner of the American flag on the victory that they had just got. You remember that picture? Someone find that for me and let me know what battle that was. But whenever we see that as a nation, it's very patriotic. And what we're saying in some cases is that the United States is the banner that we rally under. What Moses is saying here is he's making the transfer from him that he is their banner. He's making that transfer ultimately to the idea that God is our banner, God is our standard, and we rally around God, and he will be our protector, and he will be our fighter, and he will go with us into battle. So Moses is making this statement early on for Joseph, or not Joseph, for Joshua, that wherever you go, understand that you always rally underneath the banner of God. This is going to come into play later on when Joseph goes into the promised land, and there's going to be a tie to that later on. But the idea is there's always a banner, and the banner is Jehovah God, that he is here with us and will go into battle with us. And always remember that and always rally around that. Why? Because God then becomes your strength. You don't rely on your own strength, you rely on the strength of God. So let me break this down and bring this back and just bring it into focus of the points that I'm making today, and I'm going to close it out. The first thing is we're going to watch the emergence of Joshua. The first question: why is it that God chose and Moses chose Joshua to be the mentor of Moses and ultimately take the people into the promised land? What is his spirit? The second thing is we're going to see is that Joshua, and part of it is will probably be he's very loyal to Moses and he's loyal to God, and God could count on him. The second thing, before Joshua could move forward, he had to be tested by Moses. And when he said yes to Moses and he said yes to God and went into battle, Moses then had the desire to take him under his wing because he understood that he would obey him. The third thing, Joshua, whenever you go into battle, I want you to remember this one thing. You will always strive and fight against the Edomites and the Amalekites from generation to generation. Never forget that that's your fight. You're always fighting that spirit that is the opposite spirit of the kingdom of God and of God. Therefore, as you go into battle, I want you to remember this. Your standard, the standard that you hold up, is not the nation of Israel, or in our instance, it's not the nation of America. The standard you hold is the banner of God. God is our banner. We rally around God, we fight around God, we live around God, and we prosper around God. Never forget that. Joshua, you've been chosen for a task. You passed your first test. Now I want you to understand God is with you, and in your future, remember, you must always look to God's strength and not your own, for He is your banner. That's the first lesson that Joshua learned, that He is His banner. We almost sing that song as children's song of "I am my beloved and He is mine. His banner over me is love. I am my beloved and He is mine. His banner over me is love." As much as that's true that God's banner over us is love, that banner also means that wherever we go, whenever we have a fight with, whether it be our flesh or an opposing spirit of the world that wants to come against us, when we rally around the banner of God, then God promises to fight our battles for us and with us. I hope you got something out of that. I know there's a lot in there, but I wanted to just kind of do this big introduction so we can kind of get on with it and yet kind of just let you know what the significance of this story is. God is with you when you rally by Him. That's the beautiful thing. God is with you when you rally around Him, whether it's a church, His family, or an individual. Whenever you rally around God, you will never be disappointed because He's that kind of a God, and His name will bear that out. God bless you. I hope you got something out of this. I know there's a lot said there. Maybe you'll have to watch it 2 or 3 times. Heck, maybe I have to watch it 2 or 3 times so I can boil it down for tomorrow's Sunday service. Anyway, God bless you. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.